Okay, well, let's stop, or like, I guess, continue into the evening on a really hopeful note. And so again, I'll just read this out, then we're going to turn out the screens for you. But this is from Marshall Savage in the Millennium Project, written a long, long time ago. And it's about a generally positive, optimistic take on humanity's possible futures. And he says, teetering here on the fulcrum of destiny stands our own bemused species. The future of the universe hinges on what we do next. If we take up the sacred fire and stride forth into space as the torchbearers of life, this universe will be a burning. A whole frozen universe with thorn transmogrify from howling desolation to blossoming paradise. Obviously, we don't only have to go to space. We can have other mind castles too, as we already heard about. But this could maybe set like the higher bar of like really talking about building a wrapper around the different technologies that we discussed throughout today from an existential hope lens. Basically, where could we be going? Why are we not there yet? How can we advance long-term progress across the board? So really delighted to have Christine Peterson here, who is one of the co-founders of Foresight and is a very, very dear advisor still. Tom Kalil, who's... we have Tom Kalil over here, who's also been a repeat Vision Weekend guest and is really like rapidly advancing positive innovation through Schmidt Futures. We have Jason Crawford here, who is really like the hero of the philosophy and history of progress. Yes, I may call you that. Together with Samo, who's actually doing a lot of the work on history, on historical analysis of progress through the Bismarck briefs. And finally, Tammy, who even brought a few books from Stripe Press. So we're really, really delighted to have you here with a really forward pushing medium for progress-oriented studies. So thank you so much for joining. We can now, I think, turn off the projector if that's okay. Thank you so much. And we can jump right in. So first and foremost, maybe let's start broad of like, what do you think is a largely optimistic vision for the future of humanity that you personally be excited about? You can use any of the technologies that we discussed, but you definitely don't have to.
I honestly would be fascinated to see a world where artificial intelligence wasn't the future, where we would go and pursue just actually extremely high energy civilization for real, pursue something like 10x or 100x energy spending, see where that gets us. I'm also in favor of bioengineering and re-engineering human beings. I think it's very cool that we're creating new creatures, possibly bringing superintelligence into existence. But, you know, has anyone here seen what humans can do? Like online, there's this guy that just can find a photo, the location, a location of a photo, right? Like anywhere, he can find anything. And that's honestly, it's honestly kind of better than current AI. Well, what if we re-engineered that human for like 1,000 years? What if we had 1,000 years of bio and genetic engineering progress on human thinking? I think those creatures would be far more ready for the disruption of AI than we are. Thank you.
Wonderful. Tammy, do you want to?
I mean, I would echo, right now, I guess I'm thinking about two things. One is longevity. As you said, I'm the publisher of Stripe Press, and this, I had a first happen this week, which is that one of our authors, Charlie Munger, whose book we were publishing on Tuesday, died. I'm not sure what that says about if you choose to sign with Stripe Press, what may happen. But he gave his last interview a few weeks ago. And many people don't know this, but when he was 31, his oldest child, Teddy, he has 10 kids, but his oldest, Teddy, died of leukemia. And in the 1930s, when your child was diagnosed with leukemia, it was 100% fatality rate. You didn't recover from that. And he doesn't really talk about it a ton because you can imagine, right at the time he's getting divorced, he has basically lost everything, and then his son dies. And he's talking in this interview 2 weeks ago. Today, the childhood survival rate for pediatric cancer, specifically leukemia, is like 98%, right? And I am excited to live in a world where no child has to die for reasons that we can cure, right? So I've been thinking a lot about longevity and just in general, all the medical interventions that we could introduce, so I agree with you, but also energy. Of course, Joss Storrs Hall is a Foresight Fellow, and I think when people hear him talk about energy intensity and how we actually need to 10x our energy use, it just sounds delusional, right? And it sounds delusional until it's not. You know, I was rereading this week because of a panel that we did a couple years ago, the beginning of infinity. And I just love in chapter 9, when David Deutsch is talking about optimism, you know, it's sort of the ineluctable fact of the human condition that we don't know what we haven't discovered yet. And so I almost can't even answer that question because there's probably tons of frontiers that I haven't thought about enough to get excited about. So yeah, I'm just very happy to be alive.
Love it, the unknown unknowns.
It's hard to know what to add to all of the visions that have been put out there by sci-fi authors over the years, and that even just people on this panel have today have talked about. I mean, I would say the most important thing to me about an optimistic vision of the future is that it's whatever technology we build, whatever society we create, that is all of it is an extension of human agency, right? That it is all about that we don't lose control to either to a technology that we create or to societies that we create, but that all of it is about extending and strengthening our control. And I think that's really what a lot of the history of progress in technology and society has been. We are way more in control of our world than we ever used to be, and have a much less fatalistic outlook on the world than peoples did in the past. And so I just want to see that continue.
So what most excites me is how three things play together. One is longevity and rejuvenation. I think we greatly underestimate the cost of human intellectual capital that we lose as each generation marches into the buzzsaw. I have only very recently reached any level of even a small amount of wisdom, and the idea that, okay, it's almost over already, it's crazy. We have to fix this problem. So how that plays together with space development and settlement, and how that enables also healing the planet Earth. We can do all three of these. I think we can do them within 100 years. We can get a lot done in 100 years. Think of what we've done in the last 100 years. Think if it was 1924, right? We've come a long way in 100 years. I think we can do all three of these in 100 years. Let's do it.
So if you spend any time on our world in data, one of the things that you'll see is that we've had an order of magnitude improvement in child mortality, under 5 child mortality. So if we had the same rate of child mortality that we had in the 19th and early 20th century, as opposed to 5 million kids under the age of 5 dying every year, that number would be 50 million. If we could just get the entire world to where we currently are, there's an opportunity for another order of magnitude improvement. So 3 things are true. Things are terrible. That is, 5 million kids under the age of 5 are still dying every year. Things have gotten much better. They've improved by an order of magnitude. And things could be much better. They could improve by another order of magnitude yet. So that's what I'd like to see.
Wonderful. Yep, all of them are. They're very complimentary, you guys. And there's also another microphone for you there on the floor, and then we don't need to roll around. Excellent. Oh, wonderful. Okay, we have one more. Great. So now we've looked a little bit of like what could be possible, what are people excited about. Like, so now the question is like, why are we not there yet? So we're gonna deep dive into that tomorrow. But I think the Existential Hope panel, if we don't want to be Pollyannish and just like hand wave new gesture according towards where we want to go, we need to address also like a few of the bottlenecks of like why we aren't there yet. And I know that all of you guys have thought long and hard from different types of perspective on like what is really stopping us, I think, from reaching higher, from being more ambitious, and from actually going there where we'd like to be.
Well,
anyone could chime in.
On energy production, I think we passed and failed to really make use of nuclear energy the way that people expected in the 50s and 60s. And the main reason is, I think, the unit economics. It's a sort of chicken and egg problem where if you built 1,000 nuclear reactors, each individual reactor would be pretty cheap, pretty affordable, and over time, much, much safer, right? Like every year of reactor operation by a reactor is like another year of data on how that can operate safely, reliably. But, it's extremely expensive to build one of anything. It's very expensive to build 100 of something. It's very cheap to build 1,000 or 10,000 of something. And I really do think we could have made nuclear energy very cheap. We could have made it very safe, and it would have required, however, a massive upfront investment.
Anyone chime in? Go for it, Christine.
So anybody remember Dr. Seuss's Fidwick, the Big-Hearted Moose? Do you remember what happened with the moose? So Fidwick was a doer, and the entities who populated his antlers were the complainers and the talkers. And we have gotten our ratios out of whack. We have a lot of talkers and not enough doers. And the ratios are just totally screwed up. And I'm not saying we don't need some talkers, we do, but they can't solve the problems, right? They can talk about them, they can get us motivated, but without the engineers, the scientists, the technologists, the problems don't actually get fixed. And if you look at university administration numbers, it's gigantic, okay? It's huge. So I don't think this can be fixed in the United States. I don't think it's too late. The talkers outnumber the doers by so much, they won't vote to lower those numbers. So it's not going to happen here. I think we're going to have to go outside the US for some of our work.
I don't know if I agree.
Good.
And that's only because I'm sitting on a panel with all of you who are some of the chief sort of force multipliers for doers, right? You think about,
that's so sweet.
you know, when you, I mean, just in this room, I mean, it's actually really incredible to look around at the people in this room and how many of folks that you all have supported throughout the years. But you think about, like, if you run into Tom Kalil, the question he's going to ask you, right, is, you know, the magic laptop question, right? If you had President Biden or President whoever in the room, what's the one thing you would ask them to do? I think I'm going to zoom out for a second. I think we all have been thinking a lot about Oppenheimer. I thought that was a great movie. I didn't think it was too long, personally. I thought it was just right. I could have sat there for 3 more hours. But Oppenheimer is one, I think if I could just be practical about this question, I think he's one in a long line of really excellent managers. And, you know, you have Oppenheimer, you have Richard Hamming in that tradition, you have Sam Altman now. I know that that's very controversial given the past couple of weeks in that particular tradition. And it's actually quite hard to identify those. I think I agree with Anton on the last panel. I'm not sure that good ideas are getting harder to find, but the kinds of people, Bob Noyce is also in that tradition, who can operationalize good ideas, who can coordinate teams around complex challenges that require multiple years of coordination, that number of people is getting harder to find, right? So I think that sort of layer of people, like, you need your Tom Kalils, you need your Christine Petersons, right? And so, you know, how are we identifying them? How are we training them and mentoring them? And the second point goes to what Samo was saying. You know, when it comes to challenging issues, I did a podcast about infrastructure last year. Second episode was on lithium. So in California, actually not super far from LA, in the Salton Sea, which was supposed to be the next Palm Springs, that didn't happen. But what did happen is that we found a ton of lithium. In fact, it might be the largest store of lithium in the world, right? And so the question is, you know, if we could just extract that lithium, what could we do? And so you've got GM making promises that, okay, they're going to be all electric by 2035, and you've got Tesla and you've got Ford. But the problem is you actually can't extract that legally right now. And so the question is, it's a sort of safetyist thing where, you know, we want to weigh that very unpopulated place against, you know, the potential environmental dangers and whatnot. So you have a situation in which we have potentially all of the lithium that we might ever need for batteries in the Salton Sea. But the question is, like, are we going to harm the, like, 20,000 people who live there? Which doesn't mean they don't matter. But it's like this inability to weigh risk in a way that is effective or smart. And so you have these sort of crunchy coordination problems, and there's sort of a lack of will where you actually need a lot of it. So it's not that I don't want the talkers, but the talkers need to be a lot more like Tom Kalil and a lot less like whoever it is in California, who, by the way, did not respond to any of my requests for interviews about
Dear they.
you know what I mean? And like, anyway, I'll stop there. We could go on forever about
Well,
this.
Tom, I think this is a great segue into you because you are one of the corrallers of people that are really, really efficient at doing things. So how do you find them, and, like, you know, how can we do more of that?
Yeah, so I'm really attracted to people who have this idea that it is at the Goldilocks level. So if someone says, I want to improve the human condition, I'm not entirely sure what to do with that. But what I am excited about is someone who can operate not only at the forest level, but the tree level, the leaf level, and the chlorophyll level. And so I try to find people where there's some role that I can play as a force multiplier for them because they have some exciting idea, and there's some role that I can play depending on what my job happens to be at the time in terms of serving as a force multiplier for them.
I think another problem that you once mentioned to me is just the general problem of like, us really underinvesting in generally enabling tools for scientific progress. Like, what can we do about that? Do you have any ideas here?
Yeah, so one idea that I'm excited about is that we now have 2,000 families who have $500 million or more in wealth. And their current level of philanthropy is 1.2% as a percentage of their wealth. So if you assume that they're doing as well as an index fund, they could be dramatically increasing their philanthropy with no net reduction in their wealth. So to an extent that the research community, I think, has not fully realized, the potential payoff associated with agenda setting has gone way up. Because now, as opposed to saying, well, if I have this idea, but NSF and NIH don't like it, then it's not going to get funded, there's a much broader range of organizations that are in a position to support this. So I do think that philanthropists could play a role in supporting the tools that have the potential to accelerate the pace of scientific research. So for example, Eric has been supporting Sam Rodriguez and his colleagues at Future House, who are looking at the role of creating an AI scientist for biology, and Adam Marblestone, who has been working on identifying and backing focused research organizations. So those are two examples of sort of applied meta-science. And what's exciting is that it's not just Eric is supporting these ideas, but a growing number of other philanthropists are supporting them as well.
Which brings up the point that, yeah, is income inequality always a problem? I mean, in this case, it means we have a lot of families who, if you add all that up as an opportunity, it's huge. They could really make a big difference.
Yeah, I think what we should be looking at is opportunities for economic and social mobility. So I'm less concerned about whether people become financially successful. I am concerned if, significant swaths of the population are seeing stagnant or declining real wages.
Which leads to political disruption, which is where we are now.
I think the point that Tom, you just made is very interesting on the agenda setting. I saw that question in the doc. I'd love to sit there for a second, because even on the meta science question, right? These questions about like, how can we do science better? For a really long time, that agenda was stuck at the area of, okay, it turns out just throwing more money at basic science isn't the best way to achieve progress. But we just sort of stopped there. So you had article after article about how, turns out just throwing more money at basic research won't get us anywhere. And we didn't see anybody doing anything about that, right? And suddenly you have Convergia FRO, you have the ARC Institute, you have New Science, and you have Heidi Williams, who I think is doing some of the best work on even just simple things like different ways of research design. So it's really great to have people with resources to invest in these sort of unsexy, fundamental infrastructure questions of how we get better research production. So I think the agenda setting question is so powerful, right? You have Patrick Collison with the ARC Institute. He doesn't need to run anything past the 20 different people at NSF who need to decide if it's worth funding somebody who's in the sort of twilight stages of their career. And so, yeah, how can you can do actually quite a lot of good by being the person who's setting the agenda with Eric Schmidt, with Patrick Collison, with Nat Friedman, and whoever else.
Yeah, so one of the things that Patrick discovered from Fast Grants is that they did a survey of the researchers, and they said, if you had the same amount of money, but you could spend it however you want, would your research program change not at all, a little bit, or a lot? And 78% said a lot. So I think like an interesting empirical question is, what would they do if they did have more discretion about how to spend the money? And what are the underlying factors that are preventing them from doing the thing that they would like to do?
Great. Jason, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so specifically on this, I think what you just said is true. I think there's a number of other things that we've seen about the way that scientists think about their work. So a lot of the culture of science that has evolved to a point where a lot of the work is very incremental and very safe and very conservative. And so, for instance, there was another Stripe Press book, which was Donald Robbins' Scientific Freedom, where he talked about how he would go and talk to scientists and try to get them to tell him their ambitious ideas. And what he found was they literally won't even tell you what their ambitious ideas are until you have talked to them for a while, basically had a beer with them, built some trust, and then they will lean in very close and whisper, okay, here's what I really want to do, right? Similarly, Open Philanthropy did an interesting project once where they, so NIH has everybody says you should do high-risk, high-reward research. So what do you know? NIH has a high-risk, high-reward research program, right? Or transformative research, okay. And Open Philanthropy did a project once where they said, hey, what if we just took a bunch of applications to this program that got rejected, and then we review them, and maybe we'll decide to fund some of them? And so they did this, and they put out a report or a blog post or something on what they learned. And one of the things they remarked was, these proposals don't seem that transformative. Like, they don't seem that high risk. And so even when you ask scientists, please submit high-risk proposals to us, they don't send you very high-risk stuff. So there's this evidence from sort of, multiple places that there's something about the culture of science that we've created that gets the scientists to not just to tamper down that ambition at a very deep and internal level. So I think we really, I remember the last one I was going to mention was convergent research. And I heard recently from Anastasia, a comic from Convergent, who mentioned that, when you go and you talk to a scientist and you say, hey, what could you do with not a, $500K or a $2.5 million or a $1 grant? What could you do with like a $50 million fro? And at first, they don't actually have, like, all they say is, well, yeah, more money for my lab would be great. I could use lots more money for my lab. But then she said, like a week later, they will come back to you and they'll be like, well, I was, in the shower, I was thinking, and I had this totally new idea because you told me that a $50 million pot of money is actually possible. So there's something very deep in the culture of science and in just the psychology of scientists today because of that culture that is not getting them to think ambitiously enough.
Academia used to be much more tolerant of nonconformist scientists and technologists. Now it's much more constrained. You have to follow certain behavioral rules or you can't participate in academia anymore. Now I find those creative people still exist, but they're not in academia. They're independent, they start their own things, but it's very hard for them to get traditional funding. And that didn't used to be the case, I think, not as much.
I don't think I've ever heard of a risk-tolerant committee. I think a committee always has to reach agreement. And if it's risky, unusual, weird, that all gets washed out by that very process. And when it comes to funding academia, I think because it is so bureaucratized, because there is always infinite layers of oversight, committee, stakeholders to please, there's very little capriciousness or arbitrariness in what's funded. But I honestly think we should be much more capricious. We should be dropping, I don't know, like gold bars on random scientists. Possibly literally a national science lottery would be a good idea.
To the point about, though, talking versus doing, I think one important thing to do is, like, once we spend a certain amount of time diagnosing and complaining about the problem, then the question is, like, what is to be done? So Michael Nielsen and Kanjun have a great article in which they say, here are some experiments that we could do. And one example is, if you look at some VCs, they will often select on the basis of variance. So if all the partners like the idea, then they're like, oh, like this probably means that this is too obvious an idea, and therefore too many people are working on it. So we're gonna bet on some of the ideas that we're having an argument about. So you could imagine a process where you give all of the reviewers a gold star, and so that gives the ability to a single reviewer to say, I'm going to bet on Christine. I don't care what the rest of you think. So that's what I think is. I think it's great to spend a certain amount of time diagnosing the problem, understanding the problem, analyzing the problem. But my heart is with the person who wants to do something about it. And even if it's just an experiment. So I agree that we need to work on improving the ratio between talkers and doers.
It is kind of incredible. I might switch. It is kind of incredible, to all of this, to just see over the past couple of years how much, like, part of what we're, I guess, circling around to is it's incredibly powerful to just tell people you're allowed to do this. You have permission to do this. And of course, we don't want to live in a permission culture, but it actually turns out that when Fast Grants shows up, when Emergent Ventures shows up, when Convergent Research shows up, when the Institute for Progress shows up, when Smith Futures shows up and says, actually, you're just allowed to do this. We'll check in with you in a couple weeks, a couple months, a year. You get money from Tyler Cowen, and he never asks you what happened, right? And this is good. You do need that capriciousness. You do need that, like, I'm actually okay with like the optimal amount of like waste is not 0. So like, I'm actually okay if 20% of this, is just some idiot kid who had applied for an Emergent Ventures grant and ran away with it. I did something strikingly similar to that, but I think it turned out okay. And so yeah, it's incredible. So how can, and I think when we talk about existential hope, and sort of futures that we can project, craft, part of what like a really great media apparatus can do is to make people think, oh, like I didn't even realize that was possible. I'm allowed to do that, right? People talk a lot about, for example, the social network. Do you know how hard it is to make computer science look sexy and interesting and fun? No offense, some of my best ex-boyfriends have played computer science. Some of you, I'm sorry, I'm looking at some of you, right? And so sometimes, like, you can do that in different forms. In one way is with money, but in other ways with media, right? And I'll stop here and say, it's very interesting. Basically, what we're talking about is like, how can we make every scientist feel like George Church? Right? I mean, he's literally like you never know what he's up. He's like advising 100 different startups at any given moment. But when he was a kid, he went to, and he tells the story sometimes, to I think it was the 1962 World Fair, whichever one had the Space Needle. And he has never, which one was that? 64? 64, that's right. And he has never, ever forgot. Hi, Robert Zubrin. I'm a huge fan of yours. He is, speaking of, his book, The Case for Space, is amazing. You should all read it, and The Case for Mars as well. But he's never forgotten that, right? And so how do you kind of create those experiences for more people? And I think you can do that in different ways.
Yeah, I think we have like the different ARPAs here, right? We have like, other like more governmental funders, but then we also have like more private players. And I think you already mentioned a few, like you mentioned like ARC, we have the FROs now, we have SpecTech and so forth. Like people really like trying to bet individually, like individual people really like kind of like taking on the form usually of that we would have liked perhaps to take a government on. And I think, we can complain all we want, but like the other day I went to Falling Walls in Berlin, and I think they're really just like Europe is really gearing up like with organizations like JEDI or ARIA or Sprint, and they're like their first iterations of doing the things that I think have happened here already for a while on a government level there. Well, as people here have already moved on to like, okay, we want to do this better, and we're going to privatize some of that. And so I think one thing that kind of popped out of the panel is like, how can you encourage more efforts like this? And one of the things that was mentioned was just like we have to celebrate the people more that do this stuff and that take the risk, and we actually have to make it like attractive for very high net worth individuals to be supporting the sciences in the same way that they're supporting the arts. Like we need to, I think, increase the signal that people have in that way. I don't know if you want to comment on this. So it's more of a rant, I guess, than a question. But
so maybe I'll just zoom out a little bit to try to frame the bigger issue we've all been talking about, and the question you asked, which was what is preventing, or what is slowing us down, right? I see it as sort of 3 big things. So one is the culture of science, which we've just spent a bunch of time talking about, and how that has led to maybe malinvestment in science. Number 2 is we really need regulatory reform in a bunch of different areas, and this has been touched on other panels. And then number 3 is this, which we're starting to touch on, which is just general cultural attitudes towards science, technology, and progress. I think towards the end of the 20th century, a real sense of defeatism and fatalism crept into our culture. And we really lost that bold, ambitious vision of the future, right? As late as the 1960s, the U.S. as a society was dreaming about moon bases and flying cars, and all of this was just part of the zeitgeist. And since then, there isn't a sci-fi future that people believe in anymore. Certainly not one that they want to live in, right? If they believe in the potential of a sci-fi future, they're scared to death of it. The best that most people are hoping for is a future in which we avoid disaster, right? When we stop climate change, prevent pandemics, maybe relieve some extreme poverty, right? But all the kind of future that we talk about here, of longevity and nanotech and going to space and fusion energy and all that stuff, I just think it's still very much outside anything anybody in the mainstream contemplates. So yes, I think the power of media, definitely the power of ideas to get people thinking again about a high agency future in which we really make sci-fi ideas real again, as we have done so many times in the past.
For the boomer generation, for people who became scientists and technologists and engineers as boomers, we grew up reading upbeat, optimistic, ambitious science fiction. That's what we read. There were certain authors, the vision was, the heroic people, and they build a wonderful future. And I don't know if that kind of fiction is still being written by anybody. Is somebody in the audience?
But we have Stripe Press.
Do you guys publish science fiction?
I hope Elliot Pepper's around. We certainly want to. I will say, I actually think part of what's needed when we talk about a culture of progress, one of my favorite books that we've published is called The Big Score. And on the surface, it's a history of Silicon Valley, right? So it starts with Stanford and it ends just as the Mac is being introduced. But the more interesting story that you can kind of read into the text is that the kinds of people that are being profiled, the Varian brothers, the Traders 8, Bill Shockley, Steve Jobs, these are not the most pleasant people, right? They're quite prickly. And they're sort of like, and so part of this book, right, is actually a celebration of sort of difficult or unreasonable people. And I think the difference between then and now is not maybe, or like the primary difference between that set of people or that set of facts now is not what they were reading, but in fact that there was some level of cultural tolerance for sort of strange, not necessarily the most friendly, and they weren't all like this, right? Richard Hamming, everybody says, was a great person. Vannevar Bush, people have great things to say about. But I think there is, even some of my authors are quite prickly people, and I like that. And I think that, so yes, we should make better media. So if any of you have a science fiction proposal, please come find me, because if I can't publish your book, I want to help you find a publisher who can. But I think this cultural tolerance for sort of outside of the lines thinking, behavior, whatever, is important. And it doesn't mean like, every time Elon Musk says something crazy, I'm like, yeah, Elon, masterful gambit, right? But I do think you do have to have on some level this if not full-throated endorsement, this okayness with sort of...
Jacob Bronowski in The Ascent of Man says, I forget the exact line, but it's something like, progress is not made by pleasant people, or like it says something like, it's made by people who have, a great deal of courage and at least a little bit of genius. But yeah, pleasant is maybe more orthogonal.
Well, one interesting thing to me about the transformation of culture is that many of the high net worth individuals themselves could actually try to stand out more and be weird in public. Like, if I imagine who has in the last 2 years done the most for life extension and its presence in the culture, it's Brian Johnson, right? It's clearly someone taking this anti-aging approach and really marketing it. It doesn't matter if it works. It matters that everyone now knows that there's a wacky billionaire that doesn't want to grow old. And he took on that personal target, painted it on his back. And I think that does just way more than another $5 or $10 million in anti-aging. Though those $5 or $10 million, I'm sure, are needed, right? And does more than a science fiction story on immortality, because it's a living example of what is socially acceptable, what is socially tolerated. People are like, oh, nothing bad happened to him. I guess it's fine. I guess I can do something weird.
Before we leave the science fiction topic, though, I have a request to the audience. Here's what I want you guys to do. Somebody here, take the Heinlein juveniles, not the adult stuff, the juveniles, put it into one of these AI systems and say, rewrite it for the year, whatever, because we need them updated, okay? Like take out the sexism or whatever, make them modern. But that's what people read that got them excited as kids. And it's not that hard to update them. Let's just do that. Somebody do that, please.
Wonderful. Okay, we're closing in into the speaker gathering happening in a second here for all of you guys to actually get to chat with you. So what is the one thing that you wish I'd asked on this panel? What is the one thing that you really, really want to talk about that we didn't cover? Give us one sentence.
Well, I still wish we spent more time thinking about possibly very abundant energy sources. I think it would be really cool to look at geothermal as a very serious thing. You know, I want to like pierce the Earth's crust and drill kilometers beneath the surface, unlocking all of that mineral wealth, but also all of that energy that's just there, trapped under the surface. Like, you know, maybe we can't build nuclear reactors, but good enough geothermal technology would just make our planet an energy source.
I think, I don't know, I'm not going to answer your question. This is so fun when you're on a panel. You can actually just say, I'm just going to say something else. And so if I we are all libertarians here, right? One thing we are, right? No, I think if I could leave you with anything, when I started my career, I'm not very old, so it's not been a long career, but I was working at Mercatus because I loved Tyler Cowen, and I would like basically follow him around the office, and the whole goal was like maybe if I like dropped some stuff outside his door, and like I would drop papers, like this is like once every week or something. I'm like dropping something, thinking hopefully he'll invite me into his office. Eventually, we end up meeting at a like book launch party, and he just said, "You know, you can just walk into my office, right? Like you can just walk in." And so I want to tell you all we talked about this. Just walk in is actually like not the worst advice. Like you can just do things. I'm looking in the back and I see Ben Reinhardt, right, on Spec Tech. I think Ben is maybe my favorite example of somebody who just does stuff. And so while we're talking about media, while I will do my best to publish your sci-fi novel, et cetera, I actually just think we need people trying stuff. And so, yeah, you can just walk in, you can just do it. And if you need money, Tom Kalil's right there.
I would like to find a synthesis between the talking and the doing. It's one thing to just talk, and it's a lot of fun to talk in a room like this where everybody you know, mostly agrees with me already from the beginning, probably, about a lot of things, but I would love to have better strategies and tactics for figuring out what exactly do we need to talk about, at what level, at all levels of abstraction, as you discussed, and what are the tactics for actually getting the word out there to a broader and broader audience and actually having influence on the world? Because ultimately the talking has to turn into the doing, and so I'd like to find better the link between those things.
We were told earlier today that Altos Labs raised, I think it was $3 billion, which is great, and I think that's money well committed. But I would like to see some similar amount spent for AI for rejuvenation. I think it's clear that this is going to be huge. It's totally worth $3 billion. Let's find $3 billion and let's do it.
So a couple things that I'd love to talk to people about. I would love to hear your ideas for what is the next Operation Warp Speed. So in the same way that the government said to Moderna and Pfizer, if you develop a vaccine which is safe and effective, we'll buy 300 million doses. Or NASA said to SpaceX, if you develop a rocket that can go to the International Space Station and deliver and retrieve cargo and ultimately crew, not only will we buy rides on the rocket, but we'll provide milestone payments for intermediate progress towards that goal. What is the next frontier formed by Stripe, Meta, Shopify, McKinsey, and Alphabet said, we will purchase $925 million worth of permanent carbon removal. What is the next instance in which we need the purchaser of first resort in the same way that the central bank is the lender of last resort? So that's one question I'm interested in. I'm always interested in people who have ideas in response to what Tamara talked about, the magic laptop, which is that you have a magic laptop such that any press release that you write will come true. And I'm interested in the question about how could we increase the status of identifying and pursuing ambitious goals. So imagine that the president had a list of everything that was medal-worthy, in the same way that Elaine Benes at Seinfeld talked about which of her boyfriends were sponge-worthy. What are the things that you think deserve the National Medal of Freedom or the National Medal of Science and Technology?
Wonderful. Well, those are quite a few talking points, and we're going to hit the road with our speaker gatherings in just a second. But if I could get the screen up for a sec, I'm not sure if we have the person here. Well, then I'll just, it's only fine. You don't need to run. Sorry. I should have given more of a heads up. Great. Let's see. So a few of the questions here is, which of these memes closest captures how you'd like the future to look like? Between all the different futurisms out here, Solarpunk is currently winning. So if you want to change that, you can still bet on this. Next one up is, apart from AI, which technological areas are you most excited about for the long-term future? Currently, Neurotech and Biotech are trailing. They are like absolutely on a par right now. So make your voice heard. Next one up, apart from AI, which technological areas are you most worried about for humanity's future? And biotech is really winning here, whatever that may mean. And last but not least, this is a long one. I don't expect you to read all of this, but we are in the process of, at least exploring a few better words for the term eucatastrophe, which is the opposite of a catastrophe, which is an event after which the expected value of the universe is much higher than before. And we have a few contenders here. Currently, Uflexion Point is winning, but we have, I think, about 12 or 15 down the road. So if you want to get your voice heard and help us develop a new, or like at least propose a new term for eucatastrophe, for the opposite of a catastrophe, like a positive turn in human history, please do so. You can also leave some comments in here. All right, well, with that, for the next 20 minutes, we're going to have a speaker gathering here, and then I'll say a few more words about the ending of tonight, so please do stick around, and about where we're going to meet tomorrow. I will give you a little bit of a reminder of what we have ahead tomorrow, and at 5:20, we have a film screening here, pretty much first viewing of The Stag Hunt, a really incredible movie that will be happening here at 5:20, and downstairs there'll be some socializing, some biomarker self-experimentation, a brain in a dish demo. We're going to have the Stripe books out. Yay, thanks for that, Tammy. And a few other things. So for the next 20 minutes, feel free to socialize. Grab your favorite speaker. That being said, the Intelligent Cooperation panel, if you could be here, so anyone who was on that panel speaking, you will be over here. And then the Existential Hope panel, we will have you socialize in this part of the room so that people can find you easily. Thank you so much. This was absolutely wonderful.